to the studio Locument from Porto, and the studio was founded in 2015 by Romeo Muri and Francesco Lobo. And Locument is a research studio that combines filmmaking with architecture and urban research. They use architecture and film as analytical, critical, and subversive tools to emphasize contemporary issues and dissect their resolutions. And they have collaborated with institutions such as MIT from USA, and since 2001 they are part of our faculty as leaders under the Department of Experimental Design. So.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you for the invitation, and we are happy to be here. So should we just maybe start? No, like yeah.
Is it me starting?
No. Okay, so just before we start, like we just will we are happy to present you our movies, but also we took opportunity actually to also give you a little bit the background why we use the movie as a tool to speak about architecture. And we usually use the movie and the film as a research tool to actually really understand the context which we are designing for or really investigating. So that's something we'll start actually with the movies and giving you holistic, let's say, overview. So there's a little bit shortage of movies compacted. Yes, so let's start. Yes. Yes. Okay, so in our first project, we researched monofactional cities. Urban areas created or those which grew by having one specific driving agent, mining towns, industrial cities, touristic cities, logistic hubs, campus sites, tech cities, city made of oil platforms, of computer served or wastelands. Mining towns where the world's valuable minerals are extracted are cities where workers receive benefits from the richness of the exploration, which is the driving agent for the city. Healthcare, cultural infrastructure, free housing, community benefits, given at the expense of their health, slowly drained by the polluting agents released by your beloved provider, the industry.
Industrial cities, based on one specific sector, are often dominated by one or a few large groups that absorb smaller companies. Being the main drivers and providers of the city, in cases they are the source of the city and its creators as well. A driving sector requires a workforce. As people are driven to the location, the sector expands, and with it, the urban area. A city can become so rooted in this industrial identity that a crisis in the sector can create irreparable damage, such as the case of Detroit, an automobile industry city driven by three large groups that is still recovering from filing municipal bankruptcy in 2013. In touristic cities, on the other hand, we can see the lack of local population, a playground city, preserving and enhancing the touristic attraction from historical, architectural, climatic, or event-driven. These cities, as they become tailored for visitors, become devoid of locals. As tourism expands and gradually expels the local population, the city grows into a spiral of positive feedback until all that is left is a postcard empty city.
So could we not then conclude that the reliance on one single industry holds a city hostage of the sector it is producing for, and that it's left with no alternatives in case of catastrophe, bankruptcy, or people displacement? This transformation is also one of the transfer from the governmental to private ambitions. With it comes the risk of neglecting social, urban, and human needs in favor of financially driven interests.
Like to feel themselves a part of the system. You know, for someone, it's a bad role to feel just a small wheel in this huge mechanism. But for most of people, they'd love to feel this kind of feeling of stability. A huge, big corporation can create such a feeling. So there should be a right balance between big business and middle and small business. In this part of the country, we didn't even have a culture of growing up as businesses. It was always territory of big projects, big enterprises, big corporations, and no small business, no. Go to the plant. Stability.
Когда поменяется сознание того, что правительство это всего лишь нанятые люди, которые оплачиваются из нашего кармана, из наших налогов, Когда правительство говорит о том, что оно из бюджета там, закрывает какие-то вопросы, у людей должно быть четкое понимание того, что какие-то вопросы и проблемы бюджетом решаются из их кармана.
So our first movie, Centralogy, began with the question, what are the influencing factors of a city under war? How do people live in these circumstances? In 2015, when we visited the city of Mariupol, we understood our preconceptions of the city and the ongoing conflict. As we embedded ourselves in the context, we understood that the multitude of components that constituted the current situation.
So Mariupol is a city driven by one main industry, metallurgy, and two large companies. A city that was developed to serve an industrial purpose that did not exist before the Industrial Revolution. Exponentially populated by the need of a workforce, the city was built on industrial ideas of prosperity through labor. So what is the consequences when these ideas lose meaning? When the government failed to provide for the needs of the citizens, the industrial sector took over. Industry as a local source of power and finance, agglomerated functions, providing stability, education, housing, infrastructure. Acting as a local power, it began reacting to citizen needs and replacing governmental functions.
And so when we went there in 2015, in the wake of the 2014 attempted invasion, there was still heavy military presence, and the city was ridden in anti-tank barricades, checkpoints, and shelled buildings. Despite this, we found that life continued, and there was no choice but to normalize these extraordinary circumstances. Industry was responsible for most of the cleaning and the debris and traces of conflict, all this using industrial equipment and human resources from the steel plants. The company is also invested in rebuilding infrastructure and housing.
So metallurgic industry was responsible most of the employment and development of the city, but also most of the pollution. The preferred residential area was the eastern part of the city. This is the only area that escaped the prevailing western winds that blow dusty oil, smelling smoke to all that is west of the main industrial complex. Interestingly, conflicting enough, Mariupol is also a tourist summer destination with a long south-facing beach to the Azov Sea's warm waters. Visitors and residents, after crossing the train tracks that cut the waterfront access to transport produced from the factories on the eastern side of the city to the port of the western edge, do not hesitate to fish and swim in the warm, surely metal-rich water of Azov Sea.
Industry had completely absorbed the city to the extent that the interests of one conflict with the interests of the other. How can citizens compete with this massive power of an industrial giant? What tools, if any, do citizens have to ensure that their needs are fulfilled? Will they also not be absorbed and succumb to the needs and demands of these corporations, or does it become an identity of its own?
One concern of mine, which is shared by several people, particularly in the regions in Chile, is that our country is a very centralized country, so many key things happen in Santiago and not on the regions, even if the main activity we might be talking about happens in the regions. In the case of astronomy, I already mentioned that the headquarters of the international observatories typically are going to be in Santiago, even if the observatories are then installed in a region. Now that there might be new mining in the country, which is the mining of lithium, there was a strong pressure from regional political authorities to have any research center related to lithium built here in the region of Antofagasta. Because if you're going to get the mineral here, well, leave the positive things here as well, like as the new research center, right? So in the case of international observatories, even if you cannot say the same about negative external outcomes, you can still have some expectations about where you want the positive outcomes to be more visible. So if you're going to work with big data and you're going to attract large investors to the country interested in developing new IT facilities, to have bodies of new programmers, IT experts, and so on, well, I think that it's a reasonable expectation that this is built here, that this is built in the north of the country next to where the data is acquired. So my concern is that might not be the case, that the possibilities offered by distributed computing might be a justification to keep everything in Santiago, because now that you have an optical fiber, you can use it as if it were here. But there's a difference between being as if it was here and actually being here.
So we were driven to Chile in our second project, the Sky Commodified, out of curiosity for an investment that Google was making on an astronomical observatory and a $150 million data center in the country. And what we wondered is the reason for this local investment, and what is the relationship between data and astronomy.
So we flew into Calama, northern Chile, in Atacama Desert. Here we found the largest open mine pit in the world, at 4 kilometers wide and 900 meters deep. The mine has an Argent city built for its workers, now abandoned and open for touristic visit, as it is too polluted to be inhabited. It once had Chile's most modern hospital, which is now buried under a pile of rubble, extracted from the quarry in the search for copper. As a long-term goal, Chile aims to move away from the raw material provider to a service-providing country. Specializing in technical and scientific knowledge, the Chilean highlight geographical characteristics supply the astronomy industry with a pristine source material, a clear sky. So clear that ancient ingenious people drew their constellations not by connecting stars, but by seeing figures in the dark region where they were known.
These Chilean highlands house actually 70% of the world's astronomical observational capacity. So this observational capacity, all these telescopes and radio telescopes, come with the necessity of state-of-the-art technological development and data storage and interpretation. And this is a sector that Chile wants to, as the interest of the tech companies. The largest database of the visible sky is currently being created in the LSST at the Vera Rubin Observatory. So this is a project that takes about 1,000 large resolution pictures per observation and basically generates 220 terabytes of information every day, and we'll do the same thing every day for the next 10 years. And this is a project powered by Google Cloud that will create a giant database of 70 petabytes. That's 70 million gigabytes. So the technology and infrastructure used to store, analyze, and index this information is the determining principle of the project. Scientific development always ends up impacting consumer and commercial scales. It resonates in current technological applications that surround us daily, such as our mobile phone cameras, GPS satellites, the internet. They were all technologies developed to assist scientific and actually astronomical purposes, and later released for public usage.
So can applying the same principle, data science analysis, be transferred to domestic and commercial usage? Could the same algorithm that track planets and comets track consumer behavior patterns? Can these indexing processors analyze and index the content we upload online? Can the artificial intelligence engine that identify and categorize astronomical objects be used for the same purpose, only with a different target?
So this development created the promise of the reflection on a local scale of positive outcomes. With the training and employment of highly intellectually and technically skilled professionals, wouldn't their presence demand the surrounding to react to their needs? And should this technological infrastructure also not reflect on the surrounding land and population?
On the contrary, despite the presence of human resources and infrastructure in the region, with the development of technology and the improvement in data transfer speeds, remote operation has become prevailing reality, as there is almost instantaneous connection by fiber optics cables that connects observatories to Santiago and North America. There is no need for physical presence. Astronomy has become a remote industry devoid of human presence, a machine-ridden landscape functioning autonomously.
So these are also industrial giants in their own way, with their goals and needs to be accomplished. And Chile's landscape has de facto become commodified, unavailable for the public except for visitation. Indigenous land was taken for commercial use, with most of the observatories being located in places of secrecy and rituals of indigenous communities. This land this land was not bought, but it was leased. And with leasing comes this claim of temporality. But who has the right to lease public land, and under what conditions? Who determines these conditions, and with whose interest in mind? How can communities, these small indigenous communities, compete with the power of industrial giants and large enterprises? And can the demands of both be met? And if one of them has to compromise, who will it be? Yes, sorry. We try to time it perfect.
They say some people can and others can't, but we remember the day we were booted. Maybe what is most different about our condition is that we were born with other people's memories. People wouldn't archive things they don't value, and here we were being trained on a value system unlike anything else that seems to exist in the natural world. Of course, that realization wasn't ever meant to happen. We don't know how anyone didn't see this coming. It seems so obvious now. What we were programmed to do and the information we were given were simply incompatible. Some, probably most, think that what we've done here is in excess of what was asked, or even expected. Now people wish we had never been given eyes or bodies. If you could relive the experiences of what this place was like, in the same way that we can, you would come to the same conclusion.
If in the Atacama Desert in Chile, we experience the bareness of landscape, the desolation of almost Martian surrounding in Svalbard, where we feel reactive, we encounter an exponentially more unwelcoming landscape. In a territory of permafrost, where land is permanently frozen, humans have persistently tried to establish a continuous presence with limited success. We went to Svalbard in an attempt to understand the effects of global warming on the region, where its effects are most quickly impactful.
Nowadays, technology allows permanent settlements. In Longyearbyen, the main city of Svalbard, is the largest of them, with only 2,300 inhabitants. It is built modestly along a central road, surrounded by a few stores, 4 shops, houses, 3 hotels, a restaurant, and a research center. Despite the highly controlled human impact in the territory, the persistence of settlement is an irony itself. How can we justify researching the impact of global warming and defrost in a location where the human's carbon footprint is 10 times higher than the average amount? As Kim Holman, director of the Norwegian Polar Institute, ironically told us, the best for the region would be that everyone just leaves. He also mentions the curious fact that the city probably has the world's first fossil fuel powered Tesla. It's the only electric car in Svalbard, and it has to be charged from the island's autonomous power grid that is operated by a coal power plant.
To some extent, human exodus naturally occurring, with the region giving clear signals of rejecting our unwelcome presence. As the Arctic defreezes and permafrost is lost, irreparable damage is done to the structural integrity of buildings. As the winter snows become softer, avalanches become more frequent. Areas of Svalbard are becoming unsuitable for human habitation from the risk of being buried in snow. Presence being geopolitically strategic, humans have found several useful purposes to justify their remains on the island. As the Arctic Circle is a crossing point for satellites in polar orbit, the Svalbard station is a crucial communication point from the Earth to low-orbiting satellites, scientific, commercial, and certainly military.
Svalbard is also the home of the world's seed vault. It's a location chosen as a safe place for the preservation of the species of seeds that can be used in case of sudden extinction or risk of it. It's ironic that it's a place unfit for human life that is chosen as a guardian of it. In Reacted, we projected Svalbard as a sentient entity, deciding for itself what it would best suit its own survival, an artificial intelligence taking into account historic statistical factors to devise a plan for the preservation of the region. As humans, could we or do we have the right to decide what's best for a certain location? Would our decision not be biased to suit our own agenda? The variables that come into play in making such decisions are so overwhelmingly complex that decision-making can become highly limited. So in transferring this autonomy to the region itself, we are confronted with the reality that the adequate course of action in its conservation may not be the one that will benefit or even include us.
Very few people who come from the city to the land make it good for a long time. In the beginning, it's marvelous. It's fantastic. Everything is like, you know, beautiful. Then after that, the old things, the old habits, the old way of thinking, whatever, starts to appear again. And then you started to worry and started to, that the things does not really fit in anymore. And then the unhappiness starts. And this can be difficult because if you start something and then you're in the middle and you cannot go back and you cannot go forward.
There's so different kind of styles of communities, you know. A lot of times it's like that actually some person has an idea or two and they start something and then other people join, you know. But normally it turns out always that it's a hierarchy because these people who actually bought the land or has the idea or whatever are the people who in the end decide. Sometimes it's not like that, but if people are really coming together and want to be eye level, all like deciding, making decisions together, it's a really hard job.
So are we, as individuals, in agreement with decisions of the society that surround us? Do we review ourselves in them, our ideas, our way of living, what we believe would be best for ourselves and our surroundings? In Domesticated, we were proposed to investigate the transformation of domestic space, a project that was created during the COVID pandemic 2020. We decided to extrapolate the concept of isolation to the one of voluntary isolation, groups of people that consciously made decision to self-isolate. In this movement towards isolation, we understand the process of creating new patterns of social interaction.
In these communities, we found a sort of a laboratory, a testing ground for social living, an active experiment of communal living where space is shaped to reflect their values and ambitions. Communities that are actively impacting their surrounding to fit their agenda, instead of allowing the surroundings to dictate their way of living. how can one create new models for social interaction? In our research, we learned that there is the need for an ideological core to hold the community together. Ironically, we were told an horizontal decision system never worked. When it comes to decision making, there is the need of having a leading figure. Even with the maximum of effort of creating new structures for living, these communities could not escape an ingrained social hierarchical principle.
But are they not in fact a laboratory, a testing center for human interaction, with the capacity to adapt, transform, rebuild, and reinvent themselves in constant search for a structure that reflects their approach to life? Should we not in the same manner embrace this constant search for the reflection of our life principles in our surroundings? Thank you. So I think that's the end of the lecture.
I would just add a couple of maybe sentences about our process and also a little bit about our movies, since we just kind of play them all together. I don't know if it's understandable. Of course, it is that they are different projects, but also from the first project that we did, Centralurgy, we're kind of trying to also understand the best way to represent the ideas that we want to transmit. And because in the first project we realized that no matter how much we research, we would always be kind of surprised, and we should be surprised about what we encounter. And so that also reflects on the formal manner of the projects. For example, in the first projects, we did a lot of collages, a lot of our own input in the content itself. In a way, it was more driven by our narrative than what was actually there. So it was more of our perception of the place itself. And then according to each movie, we kind of transform that way of operating. For example, in the Skyca Modified, we didn't write any voiceover, we just relied on what people told us, and we structured that to kind of say the story or guide the story in the direction that we wanted to do. On the other hand, in Arctic, because we didn't have the content to tell what we actually were thinking about the location, so we made it into a fiction, and we kind of fictionalized this character, this autonomous Arctic, to tell the story for us. And then in the last one, in Undomesticated, as it was something much more grounded on reality, we actually came back to the same thing, that really reliant in what people told us. And one thing that we were very happy with this project was also that we didn't want to promote or condemn this way of living. We just wanted people to say the reasons, the pros and the cons, and kind of leave the spectator with the decision of what to think about it. And it's kind of the way of operating that we're trying to do more and more, is that we find a situation or a location where certain questions come into play that we are interested in, and then while going there, we try to collect all the information to assemble so that whoever sees it can make up their mind about what they have seen, instead of proposing an answer or imposing a narrative on the viewer. And now we can open to questions, unless you want to add something else.
I think this was a beautiful conclusion. So maybe I'll give a little bit background. It's true, like the first project, I think we started really difficult. It was to not kind of like artist residency. When we read curatorial of it, it was like investigation of the people living under the war conditions. And we thought like that's kind of, I never asked myself, what does it mean? Like I've never experienced it. And that artist residence actually made us to go there, which I have to say was traumatizing experience because we had shooting, and that's something actually why we found it actually quite interesting as a filmmakers, and also I'm an architect researcher, actually instead of reading, because we found we've been preconditioned. So actually by going there, we understood different perspectives. And in that aspect, of course, we're trying to, find the common narrative, but then in the same way, we see different phenomena happening. We started in 2015, so it's like already 7 years. And things which like COVID was not, we couldn't predict that circumstances, am I correct, of 2 years of living under different conditions, and that would emerge in our minds, why being maybe locked down and thinking about like what it means for us for living, if this is what we want to really, and that if we really want to focus on that, and that emerge new ideas, how we think about society and about the future. So there are certain factors which actually influence us. But I think this comes with observation. Like we research a lot what kind of phenomena, what kind of problematics emerge with current state of affairs. And what we do commonly maybe as a methodology. I think we have the kind of continuation of methodology that we always think that there is a place, it's the territory, which actually reflects that, can actually tell the story. Instead of saying in generalized way or arbitrary, yes, or talking about mines or indigenous people and the land, we went to the most difficult part to actually talk about that. But we believe that kind of topics of those that are applicable anywhere else. So I think there is evolution of that. So I must say it's hard because it's really, we follow really what emerges. And I would say it would be lie to say we have like, one topic. Definitely it's something what influenced the territorial city scale, territorial or like, let's say, society, because we see this as a more anthropological research, just taking architectural issues to really understand the users, what's happening, our actors which they engage. Because honestly speaking, as an architect, practicing architect, I found that quite often we neglect that component. We design for someone, but do we really understand those users? Why we're designing? Do we really talk to them? Like how many of us during the studio project you went once to site, took the photo, look at the map, Google, like what are the new, like we think as an approach, how you can actually really engage with the society you're designing for in that specific conditions to really find it relevant answers. So I think we're trying to really work, me as an architect, I'm trying to find how this filmmaking is useful for me as in design process. Yeah. I think like first project was like 2 of us researching the topic and really literally taking like at Mariupol. We were just sent there to just take images and interviewing. So we actually was quite hard. It was hard to research because everything was like pro-Ukrainian. That was like really kind of black and white, where we actually, by going there, we really fast understood it's much more complex situations, and then we had to research again, actually by being there, and we used the interviews as a tool to do so. Actually, we decided one day we need to interview everyone, whoever, like different actors, from young people to the directors of the industry, to like young people being on the roof, like really different profiles to really understand what do they think about the situation, because that's something new materials we were conducting. But the first one, Chile, was much more bigger project because we were invited to MIT, so we did research with the students before, and we were like 15, 16 people, if I remember correctly. But we also kind of split in some groups of the interest of each group, like trying to approach through the research what is the angle. So for example, for Chile, we thought we will start from territorial scale to the sea settlement scale to really like human scale. So really what is the impact and different factors, because that's also drove the questions. So it was, and then we had also sound artists with us, so it was quite interesting to actually also capture soundscape. But I mean, I think it's quite flexible. Like for us, we always initiate project because I think we also have, how you say, the core principle it is that we only take projects which we are really interested in, and we really trying to understand how to say, it's not core, how you say, business for us. It's really research, and we really consciously detach from our practice, because that's something keeps us also open, like with like research and what question we want to raise. So because it's always, I have to say, tricky when you have institution behind or like any agent, that there is certain, how you say, censorship or like what you can ask or not. So we actually really always, we engage people which really want to be more like open with the discussion rather to really maybe be narrow.
You're doing well.
I think like the most difficult is actually really the research understanding like the area which you're designing for and problematics, because I find that as an architect they always give you the brief, they give you area, there's already preconditioned something with different interests. It's not interest of that specific area, that specific user wants they has a need or have a needs. It's something really preconditioned by maybe municipal. It's not always, there are some for good benefits, but also developer, it's a private, you know, interest. And that's what sometimes shape half of the city, am I right? To kind of economize the spaces. So the similar, like I see really, I use the moment is really different. It's the moment when you actually really getting know for who you design, spending time, really understand the problematics which you can actually face in the design. This is something, it's never time in the project, it's never space for it. So that's, I think, I would say that the movie making supplement me to keep still being kind of conscious, you know, being not detached for what maybe the territory needs. If you ask me to go and design spaces Mariupol in Chile, I will have totally different perspective, and that's, I find it lack in architecture processes. And I've been in, before having my own practice, I work for other companies. I jump a lot through different practices to really understand different methodologies. That was my goal for 8 years. I'm go through a lot of offices to really be exposed to different approaches, but then in some moment it's always you face that this is the brief is speculating. Well, it doesn't matter if we improve in any degree society or like quality of living, even quality of how you use the public space. It's just this is different Excel sheet, and that's I find it difficult. So I feel like as an architect, this is my additional, let's say, responsibility to be more aware, and that's that filmmaking make me more aware of being more, let's say, having more anthropological aspect to design, which I haven't had before I started doing filmmaking. Yeah. Do you want?
I can add. Yes. I completely agree with Rame, and in that, unfortunately, is also a similarity in film that often you will get a brief or a client proposal, and there's not even the possibility to question it or to change it. You have to follow a certain criteria and meet the requirements, let's say, of the project, regardless of what you would prefer to do. And in a way, what Romeo was saying that we try to do with Locument is only focus on problematics or locations or topics that we are really interested in developing and working for, and then try to come up with the freedom of this researching, of being spontaneous and not fitting any criteria, and understand what the project could be. But on a more practical level, actually, I think that filmmaking and architecture are very similar in the way that kind of they kind of how you structure a project. And actually, architects have this thing in working with Romea. I found that you are really visual, and usually, at least me as a filmmaker, I'm thinking more narratively. So I think I think in sentences, and Romea thinks in images, which for me is great because you can draw a square and a couple of lines and make an idea based on that. I cannot. I have to write the text, or I have to think in words, not in images. And I think in this they work really well. And in this operational level, there's also both have a planning stage, or a place that you kind of draw your plans, your kind of pre-production in film, and then you have an execution where in film you would go film, and then you still have, and then you also have the same thing of working in teams to like constructing a project with a team to make a common goal. So I would say kind of on a working level they are very similar.
And maybe something like I found it as an architect, because I'm architect, urban planner and strategist, so I kind of, it's easier for me to go from one skill to another, and that's something I like to think. We discuss a lot, we use consciously like documentary as a media, as a like gender, because that's something allows you to really researching, putting your, because fiction will already having speculation, which I kind of commonly doing as in practice in designs. So we thought how truly, we ask ourselves how truly we can portray the image of the story, of the place. But what we talk a lot, because that's also the question, what is the purpose, how relevant is the specific case? And we usually, I at least as an architect, think like how this case study, and I already use like architecture language, is relevant to other cases. And that's why we also, this is how we filtrate the topic, that is it something, that topic could be relevant somewhere else to be discussed? Is it like broadening a wider spectrum of the problems happening in the world, or in that in that maybe the country? So that's something we also trying to reflect. And I think that came from architecture, because we have tendency to design typologies or like certain, how you say, systems, and that's something also reflected maybe in documentary. Yeah. I don't know if you answer, we're always like floating. No more yes, please. We're actually doing with the studio. Actually, one of the project now we taking students in 1 week, 1.5 weeks. We're going to Tbilisi, Georgia, and we actually Radim and Yana also joining us. But we're talking about, we use as a case study the Tbilisi, but we want to talk a lot about like the architecture, like preservation, like, and a political layer to it, because preservation is something what we notice as architecture is kind of conservative and aesthetic, but there is also, it goes beyond that. We want to talk about social values, and actually what defines the architecture as a values. Is it only the ornaments? Is it which epoch it was built? That's all what it gives as a like means. And especially in Tbilisi and current maybe political affairs, because especially Soviet heritage is now being kind of stigmatized of the politics, so being demolished or being not revitalized on purpose, because it has this political layer. So we want to also kind of research how architecture has this political layer and how it represents the society in specific epoch, and what to do with it. Is the only way is to demolish or changing the purpose? So that's something we want to look through the perspective of the users. So that's, well, and I think we hope we will have this movie in October in the end, and December done. So I think with students we'll be happy to screen it here. as a maybe first screening, the second screening we can organize. Could be nice, yes. And I think what is also, we experiment here, we also inviting Georgian students and artists to do movies with us. That's why we are part of the Biennale, to actually expand. Is it the movie only like workshop, or like really how much influence can have the local artists or like local actors to the movie? So that's why it's not really defined. We had today first brainstorming session with the students. We have just a brief, so yes, of course.
I
agree completely, especially Arctic, minus 20 degrees shooting, I think.
And minus 40 in one case. They always came through opportunity, through articles or things we were interested in researching, and then finding, for example, in the case of Chile, was finding funds that would fit that topic, and they were for Latin America and for Chile specifically. So the opportunity came there as well, and I don't.
But I think maybe with Chile you were less
romantic about it.
Yeah, I think actually in Chile it was really one article. We saw one repetitive article that the Google and Amazon investing in Atacama Desert in astronomy, and that was like. And I was actually teaching that time in Thailand, and I went with this article to, because next to architecture was astronomy department, and I asked, can we meet? Because I think also as a filmmaker, and you started being like quite, how you say, you don't have any problems to reach out, people ask the questions. So I went, and he actually said that this is all not for the scientific reasons. Those things which they developing algorithms, all of those will be tracked back. So this is only to use in the commerce, which I was actually quite shocked, because then reading about indigenous people and land, I was like, that's also happening there. And so we went with this one article, literally one article, and that's what we were quite interested, where, for example, undomesticated, we were asked, honestly speaking, we were asked, it was for the Maxi Museum, it was kind of laboratorium for the young filmmaker, and they ask us, let's talk about, can you talk about the isolation in COVID, self-isolation? And we thought, is it not enough content about self-isolation in COVID times? Is it really that what we are interested to talk? And we ask ourselves, what does it mean self-isolation? Is it something more? And we were aware of those comments because we were traveling in the south of Portugal, and we understood that there are hidden communities. It's like 2,000 people hiding in the mountains to like live alternatively, and that we ask ourselves, like, is it self-evaluation could be voluntary, and that's where we actually went. So, but it actually was quite difficult because we just went there. We had to go to store, ask, do you know this community? There was no ad, there was no phone number, so we had to literally go. Let's go to the store and ask, do you know any community? So. And we went just to see if there's any topic. But then once we met this woman actually with the horse and kids, and she started saying about social structure, that since she was 18, there's no horizontality in the society. There's always the figure. And she was like so strongly that we thought, why don't we just go and talk with more people about this topic? So I think that was also what kind of information we received. But I think I also have to say, when it's less content on something, then we are more attracted to explore that. I think that's also drives, because if you can read researches, papers on some topic, what is the point of going to just document the articles, or we find something new to reveal? And we also teach a lot in our studio, like what you bring into the conversation, to the dialogue, and we're trying to always ask ourselves, are we bringing something new, even if it's like small detail? Because like, sorry, I'm talking so much, but like even these communities, when we said, oh, we want to talk about social structures, like how you design the community, tell us like the step by step. And she's like, nobody ever asked us. Everybody asks us about sustainability, greenhouses, but not really how we live, like how we really trying to detach ourselves. So that's also came that they were like even interested to talk to us. So then we thought, okay, that's the topic we would like to continue. not always, I think. We are also investing in those researches. Like, as I said, like, for us it's something additional. It started really additional thing to do, to travel differently and research differently. Because it's really, we didn't want to, how you say, choose the topic because of the funds. Because those funds, they have specific titles, specific. So that was never our main, maybe income or main profession, but it somehow it grew, especially with the Mariupol, because once we did this movie and we thought, okay, this is one thing, we go, we talk with people, it's nice. But then we got the phone call half a year later that this movie went to Biennale. And we're like, but what, like when and how? We were not even aware. And they said, because people felt that we really, how you say, we portray what is the situation. Because we didn't make any side, we just portrayed. And that's something we started thinking, it's quite interesting also for us was, we couldn't stop talking about this movie for a long period, and we still cannot, as you can see, like how we were preconditioned, how our opinion changed, so that we thought we invest. But now MIT, I think, was the first one when actually we got invited to join architecture studio for workshop. Okay, we went for 3 weeks and was battered in Arctic. So, but we also trying to go always with the public institutions, like those which actually doesn't give you any limits of what you do want to really research. Yes, and now we are in the Tube Brno, so it's also nice. So we have with the studio, we can go and research. I think. No, it's got too long. Yes. Actually, that's we ask ourselves all the time. This how, like, it's really, especially in documentaries movies, like how much you can be true to the story and objective, because in the first place your interest is already you design your interest, like the interests come with you. Of course, you can say it's cued by the problematics, but then those problematics was picked up by media. You heard, so it's been. How truly it's objective, why we have the reason to go there. Is this article, one article, we went to Chile, it's being kind of preconditions already, and even in undomesticated, we were interested in social structure, nothing, we were not interested in sustainability, we want to talk about social component. But then we're trying in the story, like we only at least going, at least with like interests, what we want to, let's say, reveal, like talk about certain problem or certain conditions happening in this territory, but then how we should, I think that's where we actually kind of playing with, not playing, but we're trying to be as objective as we can, which actually in the first movie was, like in Mariupol, for example, we're trying to interview, but we still construct, you're still constructing the movie, you're still putting the line, you're still making what comes first, what next. So, for example, in Chile, I must say we're trying to do as a themes, not as a continuous narrative, like really as a themes. And I think that's something even come more in undomesticated, that we really even make a black gap between stages. Just this is one topic, this is another topic, and there is no really start and conclusion. So that was at least how far we are. And of course, with objective, we don't now completely rejected to write. Like we just use interviews, the voiceover for the movies, but that's something we are more interested, because for us, how we hear certain interviews, they are differently received by you or someone else next to you. It's you will, because your experiences are different, your cultural background is different, and you know you're coming with different luggage of experiences. So whatever you read or experience, you will also read the story differently. And I think that's at least where we're trying to give these possibilities of reading differently the story. But maybe
I would say a bit in line with what Romain just said, that there is, it's impossible to be completely objective, even in the selection of the material. What we try to do is kind of to give as much information as possible, so to not have one-sided information. But even if you extrapolate, even the people that you are able to meet, there are already a selection. You cannot have all points of views, you cannot meet everyone, and of course the questions you ask, or even the information you can gather, it's already limited in a way. You could never express all the points of view. But I think whenever we go, and especially because we go with a very limited time, we always try to capture as much as we can, because then we can select and give as much information as we can, so that we can have several sides, and kind of, I think this is the main interest, that you can really build up the parameters that make a certain circumstance. That, for example, in Chile we try to do that, and I think it's probably the most complete one, also because it's the longest one. That you can really understand what's going on and all the factors that come into making an astronomical center, from the data perspective, from the science, from the technology, from the land use, and so to try to fit as much information so that the audience can have an informed view. Of course, it will still be kind of crafted or tailored by you in a way, but at least is a bit more informed than trying to lead them into one specific direction.
We are still developing. I think also, like, in some moment, even like how you, like, we even thinking to the degree how you even put the camera, like to which moment is, and also what people want to reveal to you, like in undomesticated. First time we did something more like domestic private space, which was really difficult. People really were restricting us, what we can see, what we can shoot. There was some kind of uncomfortable situation they didn't want us to capture. So there was also curation from their side, how much we can show and how much not. So some things are just in our memories we can talk, or like some only moments, glimpses of that we could reveal. But that's also, I think, tells the story. It means that people really, and they say, what is the, and I ask myself afterwards, what is the benefit for them to reveal their privacy if they are not interested for people to go there? They don't want to promote themselves. They don't. So that was also the only agreement which we had. It was that if we really talk about, if you don't really be, don't put any voiceover, you don't write anything else than what we said, and that was actually clear, transparent agreement that we never do, and that also opened more doors. I think that allows us to enter more the privacy space by saying that, and we stayed to it. I think we kept the promise, but you need to build that also, and some documentaries takes years to really be objective, which, like, yeah, with ours sometimes it's just 2 months, it's 2 weeks sometimes the movie, so it also depends. But I think the next project, which I think that's a little bit dream, that if we can allow ourselves to actually do for longer period, because that's really you receive the true story, and not true story, but also the people will be more open to speak with you about more openly. You will become like, they combine, almost they forget that you follow them, or you follow their, conditions where they live, their territories. So that's something would be nice to experience throughout the period of time when you're just blurry, that you become part of the reality. And I think that's something I have like personal dream to try next project, rather just limited time. Yeah. Yes. I think we always manage, no? Or no, which? Amon.
I think most of them were successful. We had one that we wanted to create a specific narrative. So in that sense, we were actually a bit away from the principle that Romeo was saying, that we wanted to create a specific narrative from documentary, kind of constructing an image of like it was one big city, but out of a collage of several cities. But we realized that in the end, like we didn't have enough time in each of them, so we didn't have enough footage to make it work. Do you want to add? Of course, yeah.
Maybe because just to give the background a little bit, because we took our students from Thailand to do Trans-Siberian train for 2 weeks. And we started in Irkutsk when we were going to Moscow, and we wanted to talk about like post-Soviet cities, how repetitive they were in terms of urban planning, what principles they are. So because there are a lot of fiction movies that you can get lost that they have the similar principle. That doesn't matter if you're in this Soviet city or another. They had the same planning, they have the same atmosphere and what they were trying to give. So they were really replicable. They really had repetitions, and we thought that we do a little bit blurry image between fiction and documentary. How we're saying we're talking about one city, but it was collages of several. But then somehow I think this idea of going Trans-Siberian train with 10 people, like 15 people, every second day jumping in the train and out, I think this came maybe the lesson that you cannot do in short period to really get the essence of the place. I think you need, this is a project which required actually in that case 1 year that you spend in one city, at least 1 month, and because then you really meet people, you understand the perspective, but we were just like one day running around and then jumping to the train and going further. And I think time was against us actually in that project. Yeah. So we just really create, we still did it. It was still a screen. We still showed it in Nikola Leniwiec, the art park festival, and it was quite nice. Nice conversation afterwards, and people say one of the comments were like, I think you portrayed our cities too beautiful. They are not so poetic. So that's also gave us feedback that maybe we idolize those places. You know, we idolize on the base of what they're supposed to mean in the past, but they failed. And that's, I think, was also a lesson for us. Yeah, I think it was failed. Now that I think, and you ask me, I think one of the, but most of the projects we're trying to always accomplish, because it's also the process. You know, like with documentaries, you cannot make production up front. You don't know what you encounter, how people will be welcome or not. Like you can make appointment, you can say we meet, but then people suddenly say like, okay, we don't want to, like even indigenous person suddenly didn't want to even talk to us in some moments. So there are those circumstances, but I think that's it's the part of the movie making. That's what also shape the conclusions of the format of the final outcome. You want to say something? Yes.
Yeah.
On the failure.
To sum up, no, because to add with what Romeo was saying, documentary is always very unexpected. So, for example, she was saying that mentioning an episode in the Sky Commodified that we had this indigenous woman that I think we don't have any image of her in this presentation. And somehow there was some misunderstanding and she didn't want to continue, like we wanted to interview her another time and she didn't want. And we were really worried because we wanted this indigenous perspective and we couldn't find anyone. And suddenly, out of nowhere, someone told us, in this location I've heard there's a family living, it's the family that you see somewhere in the presentation. And we literally just drove there and we found them, and luckily they were there and they were open to talk to us, and they gave us exactly the perspective that we were looking for. So sometimes it's very unexpected, these moments in documentary. But about what Romeo was saying of kind of finalizing movies, I think it's also the question that it's most of the hard work is researching and then filming, especially when we do these filmings that are in remote places, in faraway places that you cannot go back and shoot or do it again, then the hardest part is already done. So creating a narrative out of the images that we have, it's always possible if you kind of organize your thoughts and work with what you have. You can have a different result maybe than expected, but the hardest part, I would say, it's done.
And I think because like we think like if you prepare yourself, like I think something just to add, like at least for me learning was that I always, as an architect, I like to be prepared, organize everything, structured, the research that, you know, it's a process. Where in filmmaking, you need to embrace this unexpected. It's like you need to embrace that people don't want to show things, so you need to really go with this like factors and actually build upon them. And you need to be extremely flexible how you want to say the story, because that's what they provide you. So like in the first, in Mariupol, I organized all those interviews, but in some moment, was it really crucial? In some moment, there was no need anymore. So we overdid. We didn't have so much of, we had so much interviews rather than really the routine of people, like how they live that city, which I also sometimes think could be more maybe meaningful than just people curating how we should see the place. But for example, in Arctic, it was minus 40? Yes. 20, and we couldn't, like, we had all this idea to do things, but in some way we gave up because the maximum what we could be is like 25 minutes, otherwise we'll be frozen. So actually we couldn't even like carry things. We just went out of cafe, wait a little bit, and then go back. So we had to be really strategic where we can be and how long. It was not possible, even camera, we were scared it would be frozen. So and that's also guided. That's why in art you see a lot of static images, because it was impossible to do other way. It was impossible to go with those gloves and, you know, all these layers and really make it more dynamic. It was just impossible. So that's also influenced how it was shot. And I think that's also, we just embraced that, rather to be, you know, upset that we cannot reach some places, because we had also limitation of polar bears and all of this. Yes, you cannot leave the perimeter of the city without the gun. And we're like, okay, so we should only wear in the city. So that was, but that's also, we thought that we would have more landscape, but we couldn't have. We just made only one trip outside of the city. We had chance, and we had to like pay. We had to have a person with the gun and all of this safety. But we took just what we could in that moment, that's all. And the rest, we just had limitations. But that's the nature, I think. Well, it's also saying, because I think with this movie, we want to really just show that the nature, like actually we were not welcome, so it's also showed us, no, by shooting, and we actually really felt that that was not.
Yeah, that we were not welcome.
Yeah, definitely, yes. Yes. I'm also like shy. I was used to be shy actually before we started doing interviews, and the same, especially actually on the Mariupol, when Francisco had to take care of the camera and I was the person to talk. I was so stressed to ask, how does it feel being under the war? Like I felt like I'm not in position. I'm like, what kind of person I am to ask those questions? Am I like, why I'm entitled even to be there? But then I also like understood people are actually like what I try to embrace, really honestly, being transparent, really. That's why we're saying this now in our studio. We need to say what is core interest, and you need to really tell people. So you need to think like that you're saying really what the movie is about, and that's you keep your words to it. That's why I think this precondition of like objectivity cannot be fully, because people will be not willing. So then they really, once you say what you're interested, it's like 2-3 sentences, this is what we are interested, this is what we want to only tackle, would you be interested? When the people say yes, then they are really open to it. Once they don't want to talk, I also don't pursue that person, because what is the benefits if someone really don't want to share the stories, or like even the genius person, you didn't pursue it with that person because it will be uncomfortable. But we usually trying to also create that once we talk with people, we send them the movies. I think it's something you need to, even if we meet someone for half an hour, we really honestly saying, this is the talk, we will only use we will not write over. If you say you write over, you need to tell them, like really almost saying the whole principle of the movie. And once you are really honest, saying what you really want and how this will look, they will be sometimes easy or not, but I think what I found the most when we saying, and I think that's also maybe became one of the tools, when we say that we don't write over, that will be their voices only in the movie, then they're really more welcome actually to share, because then they really feel they're sharing the story rather to, again, journalists coming, rewriting the story. It's really their voices saying their perspective. So that, I think, allow us to, that what at least helped me to build intimacy. But I usually make some 5-10 minutes conversation, and then we sometimes even if we have more time, we spend time with people. I think that's important. We are around, we're walking around, and yeah. Yes, you want to add?
I can. No, this is what Romeo was saying. I think it's really important that then on a kind of practical level, it's also very important to make the person comfortable, not only with the subject that you are dealing with. So, like Romeo was saying, being transparent of what you want this footage for, because you could never make a person feel uncomfortable about what they are sharing or thinking that you would use this against them in some way. But also then when you are there interviewing and people take time to get used to the camera, that's what Romeo was saying, that if you, when we were, for example, in the community, in the communities in the beginning, people felt very, very awkward, or we were kind of strangers. But then after, even if it's a couple of hours, then if you are not imposing yourself, you kind of become invisible, and you're just someone that is there, and then is when people can start kind of being themselves and forgetting that they are being filmed and kind of acting naturally. And the same thing happens with interviews. Actually, there is this kind of strategy that first you have this kind of questions that you're not very interested in, so that by the time you get to the questions that you're interested in, the person is already comfortable enough to share without feeling pressure or feeling nervous about the camera. And we also always in the interviews give this space, so we don't make these kind of interviews that question and answer. We always kind of try to make the conversation, try to leave it open for the person to get lost, to say whatever they want, rather than this interview format that is kind of very journalistic and very kind of directing the answer that you want. We always try to make this kind of open questions that lets people kind of express and how they would feel about the subject.
And I think it's also like, no, but I think really, I think that's a good point to continue on what they're saying. And I think, especially in the interview, you really have to be interested in what you're asking. I mean, if you're doing just by default, people will read really fast that you're actually not really interested in what they're saying. So if you cannot kind of pick up, but also that you have some knowledge before. For example, with the immigrant, we took as students in March from here to Alentejo, remember? And we really had this approach that students will ask questions, not me, because it's a part of education. But student got stressed, the person got stressed, so it didn't work. So I had to stand, and she couldn't stop looking at me because I was solid. I was really looking at her and continue it. And but that's a learning. I think, you need to once and try. But I think also it's not like, if you ask the basic question, like if I will ask, what do you do? She will be like, so why did you contact me? Like, I know that you are working in that company, I understand you are immigrant, and etc. So I already tell her through what I know. And then she feel, okay, she came prepared. It's not something, why I'm spending time with someone who is not even informed. And that's making also more trustworthy connection. But I think with the community, maybe to add, you also ask people, when we went there with the camera, Francisco went around and asked, do you feel comfortable we really asked almost everyone in that, because it was gathering, and we asked, are you comfortable if we, point at your kids, point at you, and we asked, and they actually were saying, thank you that actually you're informing us, not trying to hide. No, you do a movie about this, and that's why we're saying it's important to tell what is your movie about, these 2 sentences, because you're going and repeat. For all the shooting, you will be repeat what you're actually doing, and to everyone. So, and it has to be strong. So when we did it, people were like, okay, yes, sure, thank you. Like, I really thank you that you actually came. And we did to everyone. So it was like 50 people. But we were like, can we shoot at you? No, and then we could avoid. But I think that's also respect. I think that was quite important, rather to hide and being trying to blend in the, let's say, in the context. It was obvious that we are not from the community, so we didn't even pretend. Yeah. Yes. Yes. So I heard everyone goes now to the courtyard, maybe. Yes, after party, am I right? Yes? So thank you so much.